The dream of a lemonade stand. Oakwood High School, a place where the laughter of students mingled with the chatter of adolescents, was located in a suburb marked by its diversity. Its students came from all walks of life, bringing a vibrant mix of cultures and traditions. But not everyone in the town embraced this diversity. For some, like Police Chief Ryan Callahan, the changing demographics represented something more troubling. To him, Oakwood was losing its sense of order and becoming a town he could no longer recognize. Little did anyone know that a simple lemonade stand, set up by a 16-year-old black girl named Jasmine Carter, would be the catalyst that brought these tensions to the surface. Jasmine Carter wasn't an ordinary teenager. She was driven, not by the same goals of fitting in or impressing her peers, but by a deep-seated desire to make a difference in the world. Her friends admired her for her intelligence and her compassion, although some found her focus unusual. While others at Oakwood High were planning their weekend activities, Jasmine was planning something else: a lemonade stand to raise money for the community center that had played such a big role in her life. Jasmine's father, Marcus Carter, was a towering figure both in stature and character. He had always encouraged Jasmine to dream big, to never let the world define her limits. Marcus had his secrets, and though he had told Jasmine that his work was for the government, she never pressed for more details. All she knew was that her father was fiercely protective and commanded respect wherever he went. The weekend had arrived, and with it came the final touches on Jasmine's lemonade stand. She'd set it up on a quiet street corner near Oakwood's bustling Central Park, where families often gathered. The plan was simple: sell lemonade and donate the proceeds to the local community center, which was in desperate need of repairs and supplies for its summer reading program. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the pavement as Jasmine arranged her cups, sugar, lemons, and a small sign that read, "Lemonade for Change. Help us rebuild." She felt nervous but determined. This wasn't just about selling lemonade. It was her first step toward a greater goal of helping those in need. As she squeezed the lemons into the pitcher, Jasmine's mind wandered to the people she hoped to help. She thought about the children at the community center, many of whom came from families struggling to make ends meet. She thought about her best friend, Lena, whose family was on the verge of losing their home. This lemonade stand wasn't just a high school project. It was a lifeline for the community she loved. Jasmine's stand quickly drew attention. Passers-by smiled at the sight of the young girl working diligently, her enthusiasm contagious. One by one, families stopped to buy a cup of lemonade, each donation contributing to the growing total. The warmth in their eyes and their words of encouragement made her feel invincible. She was making a difference. But not everyone in Oakwood was pleased. As the morning wore on, a police cruiser slowly rolled to a stop across the street. Its presence immediately cast a shadow over Jasmine's stand. Police Chief Ryan Callahan stepped out of the car, his brow furrowed, and his hand resting on the belt of his uniform. He eyed the lemonade stand with a look of irritation. To Chief Callahan, this was just another example of the town's slipping grasp on what he considered order. In his mind, a lemonade stand run by a black teenager in a once predominantly white town was a symbol of everything going wrong. It wasn't about the lemonade, and it wasn't about Jasmine. It was about a changing town that no longer felt like the Oakwood he grew up in. And so he walked over, ready to make a point. "Whose stand is this?" Chief Callahan barked, his voice sharp enough to turn heads from across the park. Jasmine, surprised by the sudden intrusion, looked up with wide eyes. "It's mine, sir. I'm raising money for the community center." Chief Callahan's expression hardened. "Do you have a permit to be selling lemonade here?" Jasmine blinked in confusion. A permit? It hadn't even occurred to her that she might need one. "No, sir. I didn't know I needed one," she said, her voice wavering slightly but still firm. Callahan's frown deepened. Ignorance of the law isn't an excuse. You can't just set up shop wherever you like. Pack it up. Jasmine's heart sank. She had worked so hard, and this was for a good cause. Surely he could see that. But I'm just trying to raise money for the kids at the center. I didn't think. You didn't think because that's not your job. My job is to enforce the law. Callahan interrupted, his voice rising. His hand rested more heavily on his belt, his posture exuding authority. Around them, people began to gather, their eyes fixed on the unfolding scene. Some murmured in disbelief. Others shook their heads, but no one spoke up. Jasmine stood there, her hands trembling, her mind racing. What should she do? Pack up and leave, or stand her ground? I'm not doing anything wrong, Jasmine said softly, but defiantly. This is for the community. Callahan took a step closer, his presence now looming over her. You're breaking the law. Shut it down now. At that moment, a voice cut through the tension like a knife. Is there a problem here, Chief? Jasmine turned to see her father, Marcus Carter, walking toward them. His face was calm, but there was an intensity in his eyes that she had rarely seen. He didn't look at her, but kept his gaze locked on Chief Callahan. Callahan hesitated, clearly recognizing Marcus. There was something about Marcus Carter that made even someone as authoritative as the police chief pause. It wasn't just his stature. It was the way he carried himself, the quiet confidence in his stride, and the unspoken power in his presence. This is your daughter? Callahan asked, his tone suddenly less harsh but still bristling with authority. It is, Marcus said evenly. Is there a problem with her selling lemonade for charity? Chief Callahan straightened, his hand still on his belt. She doesn't have a permit. She's breaking the law. Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. A permit for a lemonade stand. Seems like a bit of an overreach, don't you think? Callahan shifted uncomfortably. The crowd around them had grown, and people were watching closely. Marcus's presence had shifted the balance of power in the interaction, and Callahan knew it. Still, he couldn't back down entirely. Not now, not in front of all these people. She needs to follow the rules like everyone else, Callahan said, but his voice lacked the edge it had earlier. Marcus stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. And what rule is that, Chief? The one about a young girl raising money for a good cause, or the one about you deciding who gets to do what in this town? The crowd murmured, and for the first time, a few people began to speak up. Let her sell the lemonade. Someone called out. Another voice added, it's for charity. Callahan's face reddened. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. Jasmine, standing silently between her father and the police chief, could feel the tension in the air. This wasn't just about lemonade anymore. This was about something bigger, something that had been simmering beneath the surface of Oakwood for years. The weight of history. The tension in the air thickened as Marcus Carter stood, face to face with Police Chief Ryan Callahan. Around them, the crowd continued to grow, drawn by the confrontation between the town's highest authority and a father defending his daughter's right to sell lemonade. For Jasmine, it was as if the world had slowed down. The sound of her heartbeat drowned out everything else. Marcus had always been calm, a man who rarely raised his voice. But in this moment, Jasmine could sense that something deeper had been triggered within him. She had seen her father confront difficult situations before, but never like this. This felt personal. Callahan, flustered by Marcus's calm but commanding presence, shifted on his feet. His face betrayed a mix of emotions, frustration, resentment, and perhaps a trace of fear. Marcus was no ordinary man, and Callahan knew it. But the police chief, a man who had spent years keeping control in a town that was changing faster than he liked, wasn't about to back down easily. You think you can come in here and question me? Callahan snapped, his voice louder than it needed to be. I don't care who you are. Your daughter is breaking the law. Marcus tilted his head slightly, his eyes never leaving Callahan's. What law, exactly, is she breaking, Chief? Selling lemonade to raise money for the community center. Is that really a criminal offense in Oakwood? Jasmine watched as the exchange unfolded. Her father's calm, measured tone contrasted sharply with Callahan's growing agitation. The chief's frustration was palpable, his authority slipping away with each passing moment. The crowd had already made their decision. They were on Jasmine's side. But this wasn't just about a lemonade stand anymore. It was about the simmering resentment that had been brewing in Oakwood for years, a town that was no longer the homogeneous community it once was. New faces, new cultures, and new values had changed the town's fabric, and people like Chief Callahan were struggling to adapt. The situation could have easily been resolved with a simple conversation, a warning about permits and a promise to fix things. But for Callahan, this was an opportunity to reassert his control over a town he no longer fully understood. And that made it a battle of wills. "Mr. Carter, I'm not here to argue with you," Callahan said, his tone turning cold. "The law is the law, and if your daughter doesn't shut this stand down, I'll have no choice but to arrest her." The words hung in the air like a sharp blade, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Arrest her? For selling lemonade? It seemed absurd, but the look in Callahan's eyes made it clear that he wasn't bluffing. He was ready to make an example out of Jasmine, to show that he was still in control of Oakwood, no matter how small the infraction might seem. Marcus's jaw tightened. "You're going to arrest my daughter," he repeated slowly, as if weighing each word. Callahan crossed his arms, his confidence growing again. "If she doesn't pack up and leave, yes." Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest. She looked at her father, who stood tall and unwavering, and then at the police chief, whose gaze flickered with a mixture of determination and anger. It was a standoff that neither man seemed willing to back down from. But before Marcus could respond, a voice from the crowd broke through the tension. "This is ridiculous." A woman's voice rang out, followed by the murmured agreement of others. "It's just lemonade. Let the girl sell it." Jasmine recognized the voice immediately. It was Mrs. Ortiz, one of the regulars at the community center where Jasmine often volunteered. She had always been kind to Jasmine, often bringing her kids to the center for tutoring sessions. Mrs. Ortiz stepped forward from the crowd, her expression fierce with indignation. "I've lived in this town for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this," Mrs. Ortiz continued, her voice steady. "We should be supporting kids like Jasmine, not tearing them down." Her words seemed to ignite a spark within the crowd. More voices joined in, echoing her sentiments. "She's not hurting anyone. Why is this such a big deal? It's for charity." Callahan's face reddened as the crowd began to turn against him. He had come here expecting a simple show of authority, but now the situation was spiraling out of control. He was losing the town's trust, losing the narrative. Marcus, sensing the shift, took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. "Chief, you've served this town for a long time. You've kept it safe, and for that, we're grateful. But today, you're making a mistake. Jasmine is just trying to help her community. Arresting her won't solve anything. It'll only deepen the divide in this town." For a moment, Callahan seemed to consider Marcus's words. The chief looked around at the crowd, which had grown even larger, their faces full of discontent. He could feel their eyes on him, judging him. He was no longer just a police chief trying to enforce the law. He was becoming the face of oppression in a town that was changing before his eyes. But Callahan's pride wouldn't let him back down so easily. His hand moved toward his radio, his thumb hovering over the button. "I'm calling for backup," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Before he could press the button, Marcus raised his hand, stopping him in his tracks. "You really want to escalate this?" For a lemonade stand. The crowd fell silent again, all eyes on Callahan and Marcus. For a long moment, it seemed like time had stopped. Callahan's hand hovered over his radio, his expression one of indecision. Jasmine held her breath, unsure of what would happen next. Just as it seemed like Callahan was about to call for reinforcements, a new figure emerged from the crowd. He was an older man, with graying hair and a face lined with years of experience. His suit was neatly pressed, and he walked with the confidence of someone who had seen his fair share of conflicts. "Chief Callahan," the man called out, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I think that's enough." The man stepped forward, and the crowd parted to let him through. As he approached, Jasmine realized who he was: Mayor Richard Bennett. A longtime resident of Oakwood, Mayor Bennett had always been a fair and level-headed leader, known for his ability to mediate even the most heated disputes. "Mr. Mayor," Callahan said, his voice tinged with surprise. "I didn't expect you here." "I heard there was a situation," Mayor Bennett replied, his eyes scanning the scene. "And I think it's time we put an end to it before it gets out of hand." The mayor turned to Marcus, offering him a respectful nod. "Marcus, I understand your concern, and I know your daughter is trying to do something good here." Marcus nodded in return, his expression still guarded. "Thank you, Mr. Mayor. She's just trying to help." Mayor Bennett sighed, his gaze shifting back to Callahan. "Ryan, I think we all understand that you're just doing your job, but sometimes discretion is the better part of valor. I don't think arresting a young girl for selling lemonade is going to help anyone." Callahan's face twisted with frustration, but the mayor's presence seemed to sap the last of his defiance. Reluctantly, he lowered his hand from his radio and stepped back. "Fine," he muttered, his voice tight with barely concealed anger. "But she still needs to get a permit. I'll personally help her apply for one," Mayor Bennett said smoothly, "and we'll waive any fees." The tension in the air slowly began to dissipate as the mayor's words took hold. The crowd murmured in approval, and the energy shifted from one of confrontation to resolution. Callahan, clearly humiliated by the way the situation had played out, gave one last withering look to Marcus and Jasmine before turning on his heel and walking back to his cruiser. As he drove away, the crowd erupted into applause. Jasmine, still in shock, looked up at her father, who gave her a small, reassuring smile. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did good, Jas," Marcus said softly. "You stood your ground." But as the crowd began to disperse and the tension faded, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Chief Callahan had been humiliated, and in a town like Oakwood, grudges had a way of festering. Marcus, too, seemed to sense it. As they packed up the lemonade stand for the day, his expression remained thoughtful, his eyes scanning the street for any sign of trouble. Something was coming. Jasmine could feel it. And when it arrived, she knew that her father's quiet strength might be the only thing standing between them and the storm that was about to break over Oakwood. Shadows of the past. The applause faded, and the crowd began to disperse, but the tension from the encounter with Chief Callahan still hung in the air, thick and heavy. Jasmine packed up her lemonade stand in silence, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Though the mayor had de-escalated the situation, there was an undercurrent that she couldn't shake, a feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. Her father, Marcus, remained by her side, his expression calm but his eyes alert. He had always been a man of few words, but in moments like these, Jasmine sensed a depth in him that ran far beyond his role as her father. There was something in his past, something he rarely spoke of, that gave him a quiet authority and an unshakable confidence. But today, Jasmine could see that even Marcus was unsettled. As they walked home together, Marcus glanced down at his daughter. "You handled yourself well today, Jas," he said softly. "I'm proud of you." Jasmine offered him a small smile, but her mind was still churning. "Dad, why do you think Chief Callahan acted like that?" "It's just a lemonade stand." Marcus was quiet for a moment, his eyes scanning the street as if watching for something. Sometimes, people in positions of power feel threatened when the world around them starts to change. They hold on to control because they're afraid of losing it. Jasmine frowned. But what's he afraid of? Marcus hesitated before answering. Chief Callahan represents a certain mindset that's been in this town for a long time. Oakwood's changing, and not everyone likes that. To him, you're not just a girl selling lemonade. You're a symbol of that change. Jasmine fell silent, trying to process her father's words. She had always known that race played a role in the way people were treated, but she had never experienced it so directly. Today had been a harsh reminder that despite her good intentions, there were people who would see her as a threat simply because of the color of her skin. They reached their house, a modest but well-kept home that Jasmine had lived in her entire life. The front yard was neatly trimmed, with a small garden that her mother had planted years ago before she passed away. Marcus had kept it up ever since, a way of keeping her memory alive. As they entered the house, Marcus turned to Jasmine, his expression serious. "I want you to be careful, Jas. Today wasn't just about lemonade. Callahan, he's the kind of man who doesn't forget when he's been embarrassed. And today, he felt like he lost control. He might try to get it back." Jasmine swallowed hard. "You think he's going to come after me?" Marcus shook his head slightly. "Not directly. But men like him, when they feel threatened, they lash out. They find ways to make life harder for people like us. Just stay vigilant, okay?" Jasmine nodded, though her stomach twisted with unease. She trusted her father, and if he thought something was coming, she believed him. But what could she do? She was just a 16-year-old girl trying to raise money for the community center. How could that threaten someone like Chief Callahan? Later that evening, after her homework was finished, and the house had settled into its usual quiet rhythm, Jasmine lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind kept replaying the events of the day. The way Callahan had looked at her, the way his hand had hovered over his radio, ready to call for backup as if she were some kind of criminal. She reached for her phone and scrolled through social media, searching for some distraction. But instead, she found a post that made her heart race. Someone had filmed the confrontation at the lemonade stand, and it had already gone viral. The video had been shared hundreds of times, with captions like, "Police chief harasses black teen for selling lemonade," and "Oakwood's dark side exposed." The comment section was a war zone. Some people defended Chief Callahan, saying that rules were rules, and Jasmine should have known better than to set up a stand without a permit. Others were outraged on her behalf, calling the incident an example of racial profiling and abuse of power. The video had taken on a life of its own, sparking debates far beyond Oakwood's borders. Jasmine's chest tightened. She hadn't wanted this kind of attention. She just wanted to raise money for the community center, to do something good. But now, it seemed like her simple act of charity had become a flashpoint for something much bigger. The next morning, Jasmine woke up to find her phone buzzing nonstop. Messages flooded in from friends, classmates, and even people she didn't know. Some were supportive, offering words of encouragement and solidarity. Others were cruel, mocking her or telling her to stay in her lane. It was overwhelming. As she made her way to school, Jasmine felt the weight of eyes on her. People whispered as she passed by, their gazes lingering a little too long. She had never been one for the spotlight, and now it felt like she was under a microscope. Even her teachers seemed to treat her differently, their smiles more strained, their words more careful. At lunch, Lena, her best friend, sat down across from her at their usual spot under the big oak tree in the school courtyard. Lena's eyes were wide with concern. "Jas, I saw the video. This is crazy," Lena said, her voice low. "Are you okay?" Jasmine shrugged, poking at her sandwich. "I don't know. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just wanted to help the community center." Lena nodded, her brow furrowed. "People are talking about it everywhere. Some think you're, like, a hero, and others, well, they're saying some pretty nasty things." Jasmine sighed. "I didn't ask to be anyone's hero." Lena reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I know, but maybe it's bigger than just you now. Maybe this is about standing up to people like Callahan, who think they can push people around because they've got a badge." Jasmine looked up at her friend, a lump forming in her throat. "But what if I don't want to be a part of that fight? What if I just want to be a normal kid?" Lena smiled sadly. "I get that, but sometimes you don't get to choose. Sometimes the fight finds you." Jasmine didn't respond, but Lena's words stayed with her. The fight had found her, whether she wanted it or not. As the day wore on, the tension at school only grew. In every hallway, there were whispers, pointed looks, and under-the-breath comments. Some students gave her encouraging nods, while others sneered as they passed by. Jasmine felt like she was walking a tightrope, balancing between admiration and resentment. By the time the final bell rang, she was exhausted. All she wanted to do was go home, crawl into bed, and forget that any of this had ever happened. But when she walked outside, she saw something that stopped her in her tracks. A news van was parked across the street from the school, and a reporter stood near the entrance, holding a microphone. Cameras were trained on the front doors, waiting for her. Jasmine's heart raced. This had gone too far. How had it escalated so quickly? She turned to head back inside, hoping to avoid the cameras, but it was too late. The reporter spotted her and started calling her name. Jasmine. Jasmine Carter. Can we get a word with you? Students began to gather around, their phones out, recording her every move. Jasmine froze, unsure of what to do. Should she talk to the reporter? Ignore them? Run? Before she could decide, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a text from her father. Don't talk to anyone. I'm on my way. Relief washed over her. Marcus would know what to do. He always did. But as Jasmine waited for her father to arrive, she couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was spiraling out of control. The fight Lena had talked about, the one she didn't want to be a part of, was closing in on her, and there was no way to avoid it anymore. And deep down, Jasmine knew that Chief Callahan wasn't going to let this go. The shadows of Oakwood's past were creeping back, and the town's battle for its soul had only just begun. The fight takes shape. The echo of the school bell reverberated in Jasmine's mind as she stood frozen outside Oakwood High, the news crew swarming like bees around a hive. Her heart raced as the reporter called her name again, louder this time, the camera lens a cold, unblinking eye that seemed to peer straight into her. Jasmine, can you comment on the incident at the lemonade stand? How do you feel about the response from Chief Callahan? The words blended into the background noise. The murmurs of students, the faint hum of traffic in the distance, all drowned out by the thudding of her heartbeat. She clutched her phone tightly, rereading her father's text as if it were a lifeline. Don't talk to anyone. I'm on my way. What had started as a simple charity project now felt like a runaway train, speeding down a track she hadn't chosen and wasn't prepared for. She had thought her biggest concern would be squeezing enough lemons and raising enough money to help the community center. Now her name was being thrown around in heated debates on social media, in coffee shops, and in the very hallways of her school. And in the middle of it all stood Chief Callahan, a man who was determined to remind her that Oakwood wasn't quite as welcoming as it seemed. Jasmine felt the weight of all those eyes on her, students, teachers, even strangers who had stopped on the sidewalk to see what was happening. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She couldn't face them. She wasn't ready. Without thinking, she turned on her heel and darted back into the school, her heart pounding in her chest. The familiar smell of disinfectant and the sight of lockers blurred as she rushed down the hallway, looking for somewhere to hide. She found refuge in the library, tucked away in a quiet corner where no one could see her. Jasmine sank into a chair and took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing mind. Everything felt surreal, as if she were watching someone else's life unfold. How had it come to this? She couldn't stop thinking about what Lena had said the day before. Sometimes the fight finds you. Jasmine hadn't asked for any of this. She just wanted to make a difference, to help people. But now, it seemed like she was caught in a storm much bigger than herself, a storm that had been brewing long before she ever set up that lemonade stand. The tension between people like Chief Callahan, those who clung to Oakwood's past, and the newer, more diverse community had reached a breaking point, and Jasmine was caught right in the middle of it. Her phone buzzed again, jolting her out of her thoughts. It was her father, Marcus. Outside. Come out when you're ready. Jasmine stared at the message for a long moment before rising to her feet. She couldn't hide forever. She made her way back through the now empty halls and stepped outside, blinking against the bright afternoon sun. Her father stood near the parking lot, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Marcus had always been her rock, steady and calm in the face of any storm. As she approached, his eyes softened, and he gave her a small nod of reassurance. "You okay?" he asked quietly, his voice a soothing balm in the chaos of her day. Jasmine shook her head, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to do, Dad. This is too much." Marcus studied her for a moment, then gestured for her to follow him to the car. As they climbed in, the silence between them was heavy but comforting. They drove in silence for a few blocks, and Jasmine was grateful for the quiet reprieve from the noise of the outside world. After a while, Marcus spoke, his voice thoughtful. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but sometimes life puts us in positions we didn't ask for. What matters is how we respond." Jasmine stared out the window as the familiar streets of Oakwood passed by. The town had always felt like home to her, a place of comfort and community. But now, she wasn't so sure. It felt different, fractured in ways she had never noticed before. Marcus glanced at her before continuing. "You have a choice, Jas. You can step back, let this blow over, and go back to how things were before. Or you can stand up and face it, even if it's hard, even if it's scary." Jasmine turned to her father, her eyes searching his face. "But why does it have to be me? I didn't do anything wrong." Marcus's expression softened, and he reached over to gently squeeze her hand. "I know, baby. But sometimes doing the right thing means standing your ground, even when it's unfair, even when people don't understand." They pulled into their driveway, and Marcus parked the car, but neither of them made a move to get out. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. Marcus turned to her, his eyes serious. "There's something you need to know about me," he said quietly. Jasmine frowned, confused by the sudden change in his tone. "What do you mean?" Marcus took a deep breath, as if he were about to unload a burden he had carried for a long time. "You know I worked for the government, but there's more to it than that." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. Her father had always been vague about his job, and she had never pressed him for details, respecting his need for privacy. But now, she could see the weight of whatever he was about to reveal. "I wasn't just some office worker," Marcus continued. "I worked in intelligence, Jas. Specifically, I worked undercover in areas where there were conflicts. Racial, political, social. I helped dismantle groups that posed a threat to national security." Jasmine's eyes widened. She had never imagined her father's work had been so dangerous, so important. She felt a mixture of awe and fear. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because what's happening here in Oakwood, it's not just about you. It's about something bigger. And people like Callahan. They'd been around for a long time. I've dealt with men like him before. Men who think they can control everything because they hold a badge or because they think they know better. But the truth is, they're scared. Scared of change, scared of losing power. And when people like that get scared, they get dangerous." Jasmine stared at her father, the gravity of his words sinking in. "So what do I do?" Marcus sighed. "You have to decide what kind of person you want to be. Do you want to fight for what's right, even if it's hard? Even if it means standing up to people like Callahan?" Jasmine's mind whirled with thoughts of the lemonade stand, of the viral video, of the people in Oakwood who now saw her as a symbol of something larger than herself. She had never wanted to be part of this fight, but now that it had found her, she realized that she couldn't turn away. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she whispered. Marcus smiled, a soft, reassuring smile that made her feel like a little girl again, safe in his arms. "You're stronger than you think, Jas, and you're not alone. I'm with you. We'll face this together." For the first time in days, Jasmine felt a sense of calm. She wasn't alone. She had her father, and she had the support of people who believed in her. Maybe she didn't choose this fight, but she could choose how she faced it. The next morning, things felt different. When Jasmine arrived at school, there was no news crew waiting for her, no cameras following her every move. But the tension still lingered in the hallways. She could feel it in the way people looked at her, the hushed whispers that followed her as she walked past. Lena caught up to her by her locker, her eyes wide with excitement. "Jas, did you hear? There's going to be a town hall meeting about what happened. People are talking about racial profiling and abuse of power. This is huge." Jasmine blinked, taken aback. "A town hall meeting?" "Yeah," Lena nodded enthusiastically. "The mayor's organizing it. People are really starting to pay attention. You've started something, Jas. This could really change things." Jasmine's heart pounded in her chest. She had wanted to make a difference, but she hadn't expected it to happen like this. She hadn't expected to become the face of a movement. As the day wore on, Jasmine tried to focus on her classes, but her mind kept drifting to the town hall meeting. What would she say if she were asked to speak? What if people attacked her for standing up to Callahan? What if things got worse? After school, Jasmine found herself walking to the community center, the place where it had all begun. Miss Thompson, the center's director, greeted her with a warm smile as she entered. "Jasmine, it's so good to see you," Miss Thompson said, her voice full of warmth and pride. "I heard about everything that's been happening. You've got a lot of people rooting for you." Jasmine smiled weakly. "I didn't mean for it to get this big." Miss Thompson placed a hand on her shoulder. "Change never happens quietly, Jasmine. Sometimes it starts with something small, like a lemonade stand. But when it grows, it's because people need to be heard, and you've given them a voice." Jasmine looked around the community center, at the children laughing and playing, at the posters on the walls advertising tutoring sessions and summer reading programs. This place meant everything to her. And now it was at the center of a battle she had never expected to fight. The town hall meeting was only a few days away, and Jasmine knew that her choice was clear. She could either step back and let the moment pass, or she could stand up and face it head-on. And for the first time, she knew exactly what she had to do. Standing at the crossroads. The days leading up to the town hall meeting were some of the longest of Jasmine's life. Every step she took felt heavy with the weight of expectations, both spoken and unspoken. Everywhere she went, she could sense the quiet hum of conversation about her, about the lemonade stand, about Chief Callahan. People were watching, waiting to see what she would do next. At school, Jasmine noticed the subtle shifts in the way her classmates treated her. Some, like Lena, remained steadfastly by her side, offering support and encouragement. But others, those who had never paid much attention to her before, now looked at her with either admiration or resentment. It was as if she had become a symbol, something larger than the girl who sat quietly in biology class or helped with community projects after school. She wasn't just Jasmine anymore. She was the girl who had stood up to the police chief, the girl whose lemonade stand had sparked a debate that was rippling through Oakwood. Jasmine sat in her room the night before the town hall, her desk covered in notebooks and crumpled pieces of paper. She had been trying to write something, anything, that she could say if she was called upon to speak at the meeting. Her father, Marcus, had told her not to worry, that she didn't have to say anything if she didn't want to. But deep down, Jasmine knew she had to find her voice. The town was waiting for answers, for leadership, and whether she liked it or not, she had become a central figure in this unfolding story. She glanced out her window, where the soft glow of the streetlights illuminated the quiet neighborhood. Oakwood had always felt like a safe place, a place where everyone knew each other, where life moved at a steady, predictable pace. But now it felt different. The town was divided, and that divide ran deeper than the issue of the lemonade stand. It was about race, power, and the changing face of a community that was struggling to reconcile its past with its present. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from Lena. You ready for tomorrow? No matter what happens, you've got this. We all believe in you. Jasmine stared at the message, her heart swelling with gratitude. Lena had always been there for her, through thick and thin, and knowing that her best friend was standing by her side gave her the strength to keep going. She typed a quick reply. Thanks, Lena. I'm nervous, but I know I have to do this. As she put her phone down, Jasmine took a deep breath and closed her eyes, trying to center herself. She had been so caught up in the whirlwind of events that she hadn't given herself much time to reflect. This was more than just a confrontation with Chief Callahan. It was about everything she had been taught by her father, by her mother, and by the community she loved so much. It was about standing up for what was right, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. The next morning, the air in Oakwood buzzed with anticipation. The town hall meeting had been promoted all over social media, and the local news had picked up the story, turning it into a headline that had captured the attention of people far beyond Oakwood's borders. Cars lined the streets outside the town hall, and people were already gathering in small groups outside, some holding signs that read "Justice for Jasmine" and "Stop Racial Profiling." Others, though fewer in number, stood on the opposite side of the street, their signs carrying messages like "Support the police" and "Respect the law." Jasmine arrived with Marcus by her side, her heart pounding in her chest. The sight of the crowd made her stomach churn, and for a moment she considered turning around and walking away. But when she looked up at her father, his calm, steady presence reassured her. He gave her a small nod, as if to say, "You've got this." They walked inside the town hall, where the atmosphere was thick with tension. People were seated in rows, their faces a mix of curiosity, frustration, and hope. At the front of the room was a long table where Mayor Bennett sat, flanked by a few other town officials. Chief Callahan was there too, sitting stiffly with his arms crossed, his eyes scanning the room with a wary gaze. Jasmine and Marcus found seats near the front, and as they sat down, Jasmine felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see Miss Thompson from the community center, her face lit with a proud smile. "You've done something amazing, Jasmine," Miss Thompson whispered. "No matter what happens tonight, you've already made a difference." Jasmine smiled weakly, but her nerves were still jangling. She had no idea what the night would hold, and the weight of the unknown pressed heavily on her. As more people filed into the room, the noise level grew, and soon the mayor stood to call the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Mayor Bennett began, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "We are here to discuss an issue that has clearly struck a chord in our community, the incident involving the lemonade stand run by Jasmine Carter and the actions of our police chief, Ryan Callahan. I know there are a lot of emotions on both sides of this issue, and tonight, we're here to listen to all voices." As the mayor spoke, Jasmine could feel the eyes of the room on her. She glanced up at Chief Callahan, who sat rigidly, his expression unreadable. She wondered what he was thinking. Was he embarrassed by how things had escalated? Or was he more determined than ever to assert his authority? The first few speakers were members of the community, each stepping up to the microphone to share their thoughts. Some spoke in support of Jasmine, commending her for her courage and criticizing the police for what they saw as an abuse of power. Others defended Chief Callahan, arguing that the law was the law and that Jasmine should have followed the proper procedures for setting up her stand. As the debate raged on, Jasmine's anxiety grew. Every time someone mentioned her name, it felt like a spotlight was being shone directly on her, exposing every fear and insecurity she had. But then, a familiar voice broke through the noise. "Hi, I'm Lena Garcia, and I've known Jasmine for as long as I can remember." Jasmine's head snapped up, her heart swelling as she saw Lena standing at the microphone, her voice strong and steady. "I just want to say that what happened with the lemonade stand wasn't about breaking the law. It was about someone trying to make a difference in our community. Jasmine was raising money for the community center, a place that has helped so many of us, including me. And to have her shut down like that, to be treated like a criminal for doing something good, that's what's wrong. We should be supporting people who want to help, not punishing them. The room was silent for a moment after Lena's words, and then a ripple of applause spread through the crowd. Jasmine felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. Lena had spoken the truth in a way that Jasmine hadn't been able to, and for the first time that night, Jasmine felt a glimmer of hope. But then, Chief Callahan stood up, and the room tensed once more. "I appreciate the passion in this room," Callahan began, his voice measured and controlled. "But I want to remind everyone that the law exists for a reason. It's my job to enforce it, and when someone sets up a business, no matter how small, they need to follow the proper channels. This was never about race or profiling. This was about ensuring that the law was followed." A murmur of discontent spread through the room, but Callahan pressed on. "I've been serving this town for over 20 years, and I've seen a lot of changes. Some good, some not so good. But my job has always been the same, to protect and serve. And that's what I was doing." As Callahan spoke, Jasmine felt a surge of anger rise within her. It wasn't just about the lemonade stand anymore. It was about the way he refused to acknowledge the deeper issues at play, the way he hid behind the law as a shield to avoid confronting the truth. Before she could stop herself, Jasmine stood up. Her legs were trembling, but her resolve was strong. She walked to the microphone, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room on her. "Chief Callahan," she began, her voice shaking slightly but growing stronger with each word. "This wasn't just about a lemonade stand. It was about the way you treated me, the way you acted like I was doing something wrong just because I didn't have a piece of paper that said I could sell lemonade. But it was more than that. It was the way you looked at me, like I didn't belong, like I was a problem you needed to control." The room fell deathly silent as Jasmine spoke, her words ringing out with a power she hadn't known she possessed. "I love this town," she continued, her voice steady now. "I've lived here my whole life, and I've always believed that Oakwood was a place where everyone was welcome. But what happened that day made me question that. It made me feel like there's a part of this town that doesn't want people like me, people who look like me, to succeed." Jasmine paused, taking a deep breath before delivering her final words. "I'm not here to break the law or cause trouble. I'm here because I want to help. I want this town to be the best it can be. But we can't get there if people like Chief Callahan are allowed to treat some of us like we're less than others. We deserve better." The silence in the room was thick, charged with emotion. Then, slowly, the applause began. It started with Lena and Miss Thompson, but soon it spread through the room, a tidal wave of support that washed over Jasmine, filling her with a sense of validation and purpose. As the applause grew, Chief Callahan stood still, his face a mask of unreadable emotion. For the first time, Jasmine saw a crack in his armor, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. And in that moment, she realized something. The fight wasn't just about her. It was about the entire town, about the people who had been waiting for someone to stand up and say, "Enough." As the meeting drew to a close, Jasmine walked out of the town hall with her head held high. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. She knew that. But for the first time, she felt like she was ready to face whatever came next. A new beginning. The town hall's wooden doors creaked closed behind Jasmine as she stepped out into the cool night air. The intensity of the meeting still pulsed through her veins, leaving her both exhausted and exhilarated. She had done it. She had stood up, found her voice, and spoken her truth. The crowd's applause still echoed in her ears, a hum of validation that made the weight of everything she had been carrying feel a little lighter. Lena caught up with her outside, her face glowing with pride. "Jas, that was incredible," she said, pulling Jasmine into a tight hug. "You had the whole room hanging on your every word." Jasmine smiled, though the smile was tinged with the fatigue of the long journey that had brought her here. "I just said what I needed to say. I didn't even know what I was going to say until I was standing up there." "You said exactly what everyone needed to hear," Lena said, stepping back to look her friend in the eyes. And now things are going to change. But even as Lena's words filled her with hope, Jasmine knew that the real work was just beginning. Change didn't happen overnight, and it certainly didn't happen just because one girl stood up at a town hall meeting. There would be pushback. There would be people, like Chief Callahan, who didn't want to let go of the old ways. People who feared the kind of change that Jasmine's stand represented. Her father, Marcus, approached with Miss Thompson by his side. Marcus's eyes were full of the quiet pride that had carried Jasmine through so many tough times. Miss Thompson, on the other hand, was practically beaming with excitement. "That was quite the speech, young lady," Miss Thompson said, her voice full of admiration. "You've got more strength in you than half the adults in that room. I'm proud of you." Jasmine nodded, though the reality of everything that had happened was still sinking in. "Thanks, Miss Thompson. I just hope it makes a difference." "Oh, it will," Miss Thompson replied firmly. "You've already made a difference. People are talking. People are paying attention." But as the group began to walk away from the town hall, Jasmine couldn't help but glance back at the building, her eyes landing on Chief Callahan's figure through the glass doors. He was still inside, speaking with Mayor Bennett and a few others. His posture was stiff, his face a mask of controlled anger. She could feel it, the resentment brewing beneath his calm exterior. He wasn't the type of man to let go easily. His power had been challenged in front of the entire town, and Jasmine knew that for men like him, that kind of humiliation left a mark. The next few days were a whirlwind. The town hall meeting had sparked more than just local conversation. News outlets from neighboring towns, and even a few national ones, had picked up the story of the Oakwood lemonade stand and the young girl who had stood up to authority. Some framed it as a story of racial tension in small-town America. Others focused on the broader implications of police overreach and community activism. For Jasmine, it was overwhelming. She had wanted to help the community center, to raise money for something she cared about. She had never intended to become a symbol or a rallying point for something much larger than herself. But now, as the story spread and more people reached out to her, teachers, activists, even politicians, she realized that she was at the center of a much bigger movement. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from people she didn't even know, some offering support, others hurling insults. The internet was a double-edged sword, giving her a platform, but also exposing her to a level of scrutiny and vitriol she hadn't anticipated. Some called her a hero, while others accused her of causing division in the town. It was hard to balance the praise with the criticism, and there were moments when Jasmine wondered if she had made a mistake by speaking up. One afternoon, as she sat on the porch of her house, watching the golden light of the setting sun filter through the trees, Marcus joined her. He handed her a glass of lemonade, a quiet nod to everything that had started with that simple stand. "You've been quiet today," he said, sitting down beside her. Jasmine took a sip of the lemonade, the tartness sharp on her tongue. "I don't know, Dad. I feel like things are spiraling out of control. I didn't ask for any of this." Marcus nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "I know. But sometimes life hands you a path you didn't expect. And from what I've seen, you're handling it better than most people your age, or any age, would." Jasmine smiled faintly. "I'm not sure if I'm handling it at all. It's like everything is moving so fast, and I don't know where it's going." Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "That's the thing about change, Jas. It's messy. It's unpredictable. And it's uncomfortable. But if it were easy, it wouldn't be worth fighting for." Jasmine looked down at the glass in her hands, the ice cubes clinking softly as they melted in the warmth of the evening. "Do you think I made the right choice, speaking up at the town hall?" "I think you made the choice that was true to who you are," Marcus said quietly. "And that's always the right choice." They sat in silence for a while, the sounds of the neighborhood, children playing, dogs barking, distant conversations, filling the air. It was a moment of calm, but Jasmine knew it wouldn't last forever. There were still so many questions, so many unresolved issues. What would happen next with Chief Callahan? Would the town really change, or would this just be another moment that faded away, lost in the noise of daily life? But there were glimmers of hope, too. The community center had received an outpouring of donations after the story of the lemonade stand went viral. Local businesses had offered to help repair the roof, and volunteers had stepped up to support the summer reading program. Jasmine's small act of charity had blossomed into something much larger, something that would benefit the town in tangible ways. One evening, just as the first hint of autumn cooled the late summer air, Jasmine received a call from Mayor Bennett. His voice was warm, but there was a seriousness to his tone that immediately put Jasmine on edge. "Jasmine, I've been doing a lot of thinking since the town hall," the mayor began. "It's clear that the community wants change. They want accountability. And after everything that's happened, I've decided to launch a full review of the police department's policies, including the role Chief Callahan has played in recent incidents." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. "You mean you're going to investigate him?" "Yes," Mayor Bennett replied. "We can't ignore the concerns that have been raised. This town deserves transparency, and we need to make sure that everyone, regardless of who they are, feels safe and respected by those in positions of authority." The news hit Jasmine like a wave. She had hoped for change, but she hadn't expected it to come this quickly. "What happens now?" "There will be a formal process," the mayor explained. "We'll bring in outside investigators to ensure impartiality. And Jasmine, I want you to know that your courage helped make this happen. You showed this town that one voice can make a difference." When she hung up the phone, Jasmine sat in stunned silence. An investigation, a real investigation into Chief Callahan, and the way he had handled not just her case, but others that had likely flown under the radar. It felt surreal, like a dream she hadn't dared to dream. The next day, word spread quickly about the mayor's decision. The atmosphere in Oakwood shifted, the undercurrent of tension giving way to a cautious optimism. People began talking about the future, about the possibility of real change, and for the first time in weeks, Jasmine felt like the fight she had been drawn into wasn't just a burden, it was a chance. Still, not everyone was on board. There were those who grumbled about caving to pressure and disrespecting the police. But Jasmine had come to understand that progress never happened without pushback, and she had seen enough to know that the pushback wouldn't deter her. If anything, it made her more resolute. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine found herself pulled into conversations with community leaders, activists, and even journalists who wanted to hear her story. She attended meetings about police reform, joined discussions about race and equity, and realized that her voice, once quiet, once unsure, had become a powerful tool for change. Chief Callahan, who had once loomed so large in her mind as a symbol of everything she feared, slowly began to fade from the forefront. He remained under investigation, but the community had turned its attention to the broader issues that needed addressing. The fight was no longer just about him. It was about building a future where everyone in Oakwood felt seen, heard, and valued. One day, after a particularly long meeting at the community center, Jasmine stood outside and looked up at the clear sky. She breathed in deeply, feeling the weight of the past few months settle in her chest. But this time, it didn't feel heavy with fear or uncertainty. It felt full, full of possibility, full of hope. Marcus walked up beside her, his hands in his pockets, a proud smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Look how far you've come," he said softly. Jasmine smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude for the journey she had been on, for the people who had stood by her, and for the change she had helped spark. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad," she said, leaning against him as they looked out at the town that was beginning to change, one small step at a time. But the biggest change had happened inside Jasmine herself. She had discovered a strength she didn't know she had. She had learned that even when the fight finds you, you can choose to rise to meet it. And in doing so, you can change not just your own life, but the lives of those around you. As the sun set over Oakwood, casting a warm glow over the town, Jasmine knew that this was only the beginning.